What would you do if your life stopped being yours before it even began? I was 20 when my father's pride turned into my prison. His fear of poverty, his obsession with appearances, sold me to a man nearly twice his age, a man the whole town called cursed. I had braced myself for cruelty. I expected to be broken, silenced, owned. But what I discovered on that wedding night wasn't cruelty, it was a secret. One that had lived in shadows longer than I had been alive. And strangely, that secret would be the thing that set both of us free. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations, if you've ever been told who you're supposed to be, this story is for you. I was born in 1947 in a sagging wooden house outside of Maple Hollow, Tennessee. My father, Henry Cole, worked the land of others for pennies, and my mother, Ruth, sewed buttons and mended hems to keep food on our table. We were poor, but in those early years, I never knew it. Poverty only becomes real when pride enters the room. This one's got fire in her, the midwife said when I came wailing into the world. If only she'd known how that fire would be smothered before. I even had the chance to burn bright. I grew up the youngest of 6'5", older brothers who roamed the hills freely while I learned how to make biscuits and patch socks. People say brothers protect their sisters. Mine didn't. They feared my father too much to challenge him. Girls don't run the roads. He'd bark whenever I tried to follow my brothers outside. Your place is with your mama. I was 5 the first time he said that. I still remember the taste of dust in my mouth as I watched my brothers' laughter fade down the road, knowing I wasn't allowed to follow. That was the day I learned freedom wasn't for everyone. It was only for those born male or rich. As I grew, the walls around me got tighter. While my brothers climbed trees and went fishing at the creek, I learned to sew, to clean, to cook. Better learn it well, Mama would say softly. A man doesn't want a girl who can't keep house. A man. Even before I was old enough to braid my hair, my whole life was shaped around one I hadn't even met. By 10, my father's rules multiplied like weeds. You don't go anywhere alone, he'd declare. If you're seen talking to a boy, people will start talking. Talking such a small word, but one that controlled my every movement. Once, when I was 12, I watched girls my age spitting around the churchyard singing Ring Around the Rosie. I asked Mama if I could join. She looked at me sadly and shook her head. Your daddy won't have it, sweet. But why? I asked. Because girls who play in the street, she whispered, get lost. Lost. How could a child get lost in daylight? But in my father's eyes, joy was dangerous. Laughter was temptation and freedom was sin. At 14, school ended for me. Enough books, my father said. You've got a home to tend. The right man will come along soon enough. I didn't even know what the right man meant, only that he'd be chosen for me like livestock at an auction. My only taste of freedom came from a woman named Miss Harper, the town librarian. She had never married, and everyone whispered she was odd. Maybe that's why she saw something in me. When father wasn't looking, she'd slip books into my basket, Jane Eyre, Little Women, anything she could spare. Keep your mind sharp, Clara, she'd whisper. They can lock up your body, but not your thoughts. Those words burned brighter than any sermon I'd ever heard. And though I didn't yet understand how, I knew she was right. The years dragged on. By 17, I was a ghost in my own home scene, not heard. Suitors came and went, none allowed past the gate. When a kind boy from church asked my father for permission to court me, I thought my life might finally begin. No, father said flatly. Why not? Mama pleaded. Because she's not ready. Because I said so. Too young at 17, too unfit at 18, too precious at 19, always too something. And every year that passed, I felt myself fading, piece by piece. At 19, I started to dream of escape. Maybe I'd run off to Nashville, find work, make my own way. But dreams like that were dangerous. Girls who left home were branded ruined, and ruin, to my father, was worse than death. Then came the drought of 67. The land dried, cattle starved, and my father's pride cracked wider than the earth itself. That's when I learned the cruelest truth. Even the purest daughter has a price. I still remember the day he told me. "Clara," he said, not meeting my eyes, "a man's offered to marry you. He's well off. You'll be taken care of." "Who is he?" I asked. "Mr. Abram Shaw." I froze. Everyone in Maple Hollow knew that name. A reclusive man in his 40s, wealthy but strange. People said he had secrets buried deeper than the well on his land. "Daddy," I whispered, "he's old enough to be my grandfather." "It's for the best," he said, his voice cracking. "He'll provide for you and for us." And just like that, my fate was sealed. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a bargain, a price paid to keep a man's pride intact. I thought I was being sold into misery. I didn't know. I was walking straight into the arms of a man whose secret would rewrite the meaning of love itself. The morning my father told me I was to be married, the air smelled of dust and regret. The drought had stolen everything from us, our crops, our cattle, our dignity. But it wasn't the hunger that haunted my father. It was the thought of people knowing he couldn't provide. Pride, it turns out, is a heavier burden than hunger. "He's a good man, Clara," Daddy said, staring into his coffee instead of my eyes. "He's got land, a house, and means to take care of you." "And how old is he?" I asked softly. 45, he muttered. "But he's decent. That's what matters." Decent. As if decency could fill the space where love should be. Mama sat in the corner, sewing in silence, her needle trembling. She'd always been gentle, but that morning her hands looked too small to hold so much sorrow. "Does he know about this?" I asked her. She didn't look up. "Your father's already given his word, honey. Given his word." That's what they called it when a man sold something he didn't own. The wedding was set for 9 days later. There was no courtship, no conversation, not even a glimpse of the man who would soon be my husband. I was told to be grateful that most girls my age would kill for security. But what kind of security comes wrapped in fear? When I tried to argue, Daddy slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates rattled. "Enough, Clara. A man does what he must to save his family. You'll thank me one day." I wanted to scream, to tell him that a cage, even a golden one, is still a cage. But the words died in my throat. In our house, silence was a form of survival. That night, I cried until my pillow was wet through. "Why me, God?" I whispered. And though I didn't hear an answer, I felt something shift deep inside, a small spark of defiance that refused to go out. The morning of the wedding came too soon. Mama dressed me in a simple ivory gown that Mr. Shaw himself had paid for. It was beautiful, really soft lace, delicate sleeves, but it felt like wearing someone else's skin. "You look lovely," Mama whispered, her voice trembling. "Like a proper lady." "If I were a proper lady," I said quietly, "I'd be choosing my own groom." She didn't reply, just tucked a lock of hair behind my ear and kissed my forehead. When I stepped out of the house, the whole town was waiting. Maple Hollow wasn't big, and gossip traveled faster than wind. People wanted to see the poor, farmer's daughter marrying the richest, recluse in the county. "Heard he killed a man once," someone whispered. No, another said. "He just ain't right in the head." Their voices were like gnats buzzing in my ears as I walked down the church aisle beside my father, who held his chin high like a man marching his daughter to salvation, not to sale. Abram Shaw stood waiting at the altar in a black suit that fit too well for a man who lived alone. His hair was silver at the temples, his hands rough but steady. His eyes, though his eyes were strange, sad, almost frightened. When the preacher asked if I took this man to be my husband, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, But because I wanted, just for one heartbeat, to imagine what no would feel like on my tongue. But then I saw Daddy's face in the crowd's turn, expectant, and I whispered, I do. The preacher smiled. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. And just like that, I wasn't Clara Cole anymore. I was Mrs. Claire Shaw. The reception was held at our old home, the irony thick as smoke. People clapped, danced, laughed, and told me how lucky I was. I smiled when they looked at me, nodded when they spoke, but inside I felt hollow. Arthur no, Abram stood beside me politely, offering handshakes and short replies. He wasn't cruel, just distant, like a man performing a duty rather than living a dream. When the fiddles stopped playing and the lanterns dimmed, he turned to me. It's time, he said quietly. Time, such a simple word, and yet it felt like the sound of a lock turning. I hugged Mama one last time. Be a good wife, she whispered. He'll take care of you. And that was the last piece of advice my mother ever gave me. As we drove away in his truck, the road to his farm stretched dark and endless ahead of us. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting shadows that looked like reaching hands. I wanted to ask him something, anything, but fear kept my lips still. Finally, he broke the silence. I know this isn't what you wanted, he said softly, eyes fixed on the road. But I'll do my best to make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. Not happy. Not loved. Just comfortable. When we arrived, his farmhouse loomed like something out of a painting large, sturdy and lonely. A single lamp glowed from the porch, where an older woman greeted us. This is Mrs. Duval, he said. She helps with the house. Welcome, ma'am, she said kindly. We've got your room ready. Our room. The words froze me in place. He led me upstairs, stopping at the bedroom door. Clara, he said quietly, before we go in, there's something I need to tell you. Something important. His face had gone pale, his hands trembling slightly. What is it? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He took a long, steady breath and looked at me with those haunted eyes. It's about why I've never been married before, and why this marriage will be different. I thought the nightmare was about to begin. I didn't realize the secret he was about to reveal would make me question everything. I thought I knew about shame, love, and what it means to be whole. He stood at the door, one hand on the frame, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The lantern's glow caught the lines in his face, lines carved not by age, but by years of silence. I need to tell you something, Abram said quietly. Something no one else knows. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. A big bed stood in the middle, too big for the space between us. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, though my legs trembled beneath the silk of my wedding dress. I've never told another soul, he began, his voice rough. Not my father, not my doctor, not even the preacher. I waited, my heart beating like a drum in my throat. I'm not like other men, he said finally. At least, not in the way that matters to most women. I frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? He took a deep breath, as though swallowing years of shame. When I was a boy, I realized something was wrong with me. My body didn't develop like it should have. I'm incomplete. The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. I didn't understand at first. I had grown up too sheltered, too guarded to know what that meant. He saw the confusion in my eyes and looked away. I'm trying to say, he whispered, that I can't give you what a husband normally gives his wife. For a long moment, all I could do was stare, not in disgust, just disbelief. I had prepared myself for cruelty, not for confession. He turned his back to me, his voice trembling now. That's why I've never married. I thought I could live alone forever. But loneliness has a way of breaking a man. Clara, when I heard about your family's trouble, I thought maybe... He hesitated. Maybe I could save someone while saving myself. You bought me, I said before I could stop myself. He flinched. I know how it looks. And you're right. I did what desperate men do. I offered money to buy what I thought I couldn't earn. But I swear I never meant to hurt you. He turned to face me then, and I saw the truth in his eyes, not lust, not pride, just fear. A lifetime of it. I won't touch you, he said softly. Not unless you want me to. You'll have your own space, your own life here. I only ask that you don't leave me alone. That's all I wanted, someone who wouldn't walk away if they knew. The room went quiet again. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. For the first time that day, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Not the cruel kind that makes you look down on someone, but the kind that makes your heart ache for them. You've lived with that secret all your life? I asked. He nodded. Every day. It's a lonely thing, carrying shame for something you didn't choose. Something inside me cracked then. Because hadn't I carried my father's shame in much the same way? Hadn't I been punished for something I didn't choose either? When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but steady. So, what happens now? He blinked, surprised by my calm. Now? Whatever you wish, Mrs. Shaw. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. If you want to stay, I'll give you everything I can: kindness, security, respect. It may not be the marriage you dreamed of, but I promise it won't be a prison. For the first time since we met, I saw him smile faintly, hesitantly, like someone who had forgotten how. I don't even know what I dreamed of, I admitted. My father never gave me time to. He let out a shaky laugh. Then maybe we can learn together. That night, I didn't run. I thought about it, yes, packing a small bag, sneaking out into the cold Tennessee dark, but where would I go? A woman alone had no place in the world except the one she was given. So I stayed. He slept in the guest room that night. I lay awake in our marriage bed, staring at the ceiling. I had expected fear, disgust, maybe even anger. But what I felt instead was something I couldn't name. Relief, perhaps, because for the first time, someone had given me a choice. When morning came, I found a note on the kitchen table. Breakfast is on the stove. I'll be out in the fields. I lifted the lid of the pot and found scrambled eggs, slightly burned but made with care. No man had ever cooked for me before. I ate alone, the house echoing with quiet. There was an emptiness in the air, but it wasn't cruel. It was gentle, patient, like a pause before something begins. Over the next few days, he kept his distance, but not his kindness. He left small things on my nightstand: a book, a jar of wildflowers, a tin of sugar cookies. He didn't say much, but when he did, it was never harsh. I found myself reading again, just as I had as a child, only now in his library filled with old leather books. The smell of ink and wood reminded me that my mind was still my own. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I heard a crash from downstairs, a sound like thunder and breaking glass. Abram, I called, running to the staircase. He was lying at the bottom, pale as linen, his leg twisted unnaturally. Mrs. Duval, I screamed. Fetch the doctor now. For the first time since my wedding day, I didn't feel like property or a prisoner. I felt something else entirely. I felt needed. As I nursed him through the long nights of fever, something inside me changed. And when he finally opened his eyes, I realized that the man I'd been sold to might be the only one who ever truly saw. Me, the doctor, said the fall could have killed him. A broken leg, a cracked rib, and a fever that refused to break. For days, Mr. Abram Shaw drifted between sleep and delirium, calling out names I didn't know. Some nights he murmured prayers. Other nights he whispered my name. And I, his accidental wife, the girl who hadn't chosen him, sat beside that bed, wiping his forehead and coaxing him to drink broth spoon by spoon. Mrs. Duval kept shaking her head. You ought to rest, child. He's got you near to falling over. But I couldn't. For the first time in my life, someone needed me not because I was obedient or pure or proper, but simply because I was there. Rest, he muttered once, half awake. I will when you do, I whispered back. For 2 long weeks, I barely left that room. The house smelled of medicine and sweat. I read to him from his own library when he was restless Dickens, Austen, anything with hope in it. When the fever raged, I prayed beside the bed, begging God not to take away the only person who had ever looked at me without judgment. On the 12th night, his fever broke. The next morning, when the sunlight fell through the curtains, he blinked and looked straight at me. You stayed, he rasped. Of course I stayed, I said, my voice catching. I'm your wife. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both gratitude and disbelief. I don't deserve that. No one deserves grace, I said. We just give it when we can. He stared at me for a long time, as if trying to memorize my face. You've got more strength than I ever had, he whispered. Maybe I did. Or maybe I had simply spent my whole life saving pieces of myself for a moment like this. When the doctor finally declared him out of danger, Abram asked if I'd read to him still, not the sad ones. He said, something about people who survive. So I chose David Copperfield. Why this one? He asked one evening as I turned the pages. Because it's about a boy who learns to stand on his own 2 feet, even when the world tries to keep him crawling, I replied. He chuckled softly. Sounds like someone I know. That was the first night he asked me to pull up a chair instead of standing across the room. The first night we spoke like equals. A few days later, he asked me to fetch his ledgers, the big leather-bound books where he kept records of his farm. If you're going to spend so much time in this house, he said, you might as well learn how it works. So I did. I learned about crops, livestock, debts, and trades. I learned how to read numbers that once looked like foreign language. He was patient, kind, and even a little proud. You're quicker than most men I've hired, he said once, shaking his head with a grin. And something inside me stirred something long, buried beneath years of obedience and silence. By spring, he was walking again, leaning on a cane but steady. The first time he made it to the porch without help, he turned to me. You gave me back my legs, he said. I smiled, and you gave me back my mind, because it was true. My father had locked me inside 4 walls and called it protection. Abram opened his doors and called it partnership. We spent long evenings on that porch, him smoking his pipe, me shelling peas or mending clothes. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. We didn't have to. The quiet between us was different now, not cold, but warm. One night he said softly, you know, Clara, I used to think my life was over long before I met you. Why? I asked. Because I thought being half a man meant I didn't deserve love. I looked at him, then the man who had bought me out of desperation, who had confessed his shame without flinching. Maybe love isn't something you deserve, I said. Maybe it's something you choose to give, even when you think you've got nothing left. He nodded, eyes glistening. You make it sound simple. It is, I said. It's people who make it complicated. Months passed. The house that once felt foreign began to feel like home. Mrs. Duval teased that I was, turning the place upside down with all that light and noise. Maybe I was. For the first time in years, I laughed, really laughed. I discovered that Abram had a dry sense of humor and a love for music he never shared with anyone. On Sundays, I'd play the old piano in the parlor, and he'd sit quietly, tapping his fingers on the armrest, lost in thought. He never tried to touch me beyond what kindness allowed, and I never felt the need to pull away. Our love wasn't made of passion. It was made of peace. One evening, as fireflies blinked over the garden, he said something that stayed with me forever. Clara, he murmured, I spent my youth hiding from what I lacked. But you've shown me that sometimes The only thing worth having is someone who sees you as you are. And what do you see when you look at me? I asked. He smiled. Freedom. The kind I thought I'd never have. I realized then that freedom wasn't just leaving something behind, it was finding a place where you could finally be yourself. But even freedom has its price. And soon a letter from my father would arrive, one that would test everything Abram and I had built and force me to decide who I truly belonged to. The letter came on a hot July afternoon, the kind where the air itself feels tired. Mrs. Duval found it on the porch and brought it to me with a worried look. It's from your folks, she said. Postmarked from Maple Hollow. I hadn't heard from them since the wedding. For over a year, there'd been silence, no letters, no visits, not even a whisper carried through town. I thought they'd erased me, the way people erase shame. My hands trembled as I unfolded the envelope. The handwriting was Mama's, neat but shaky. My dearest Clara, your father has taken ill. The doctor says his heart is failing. He's asked for you. Please, child, come home before it's too late. I sat there for a long time, the words blurring on the page. Part of me wanted to go that very moment. Another part wanted to burn the letter to ash. Abram found me sitting on the porch steps, the paper clenched in my fist. What's wrong? He asked gently. I handed him the letter. He read it, sighed, then looked at me with those calm, steady eyes that always seemed to see past my defenses. You should go, he said. I don't know if I can, I whispered. After what he did, after selling me like a sack of grain, how do I look him in the eye again? He sat beside me, the boards creaking under his weight. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about them, he said quietly. It's about freeing yourself from the hurt they left behind. I turned the letter over in my hands, feeling its weight. What if he doesn't ask for forgiveness? Then you'll know you've done your part, he said. And you can walk away lighter. 2 mornings later, we hitched the wagon and rode back to Maple Hollow. The road was dusty and overgrown, the same path I had traveled on my wedding day, except now the girl who left was gone. When we reached the old house, the porch looked smaller, the walls more faded than I remembered. Mama came running out, her apron streaked with flour, tears in her eyes. Clara, she cried, clutching me tight. Oh, my sweet girl, you came. Inside, my father lay in the same bed where I'd once cried myself to sleep as a child. He looked older, thinner, smaller, like time had folded him in half. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he said, You look well, daughter. I am, I replied. Thanks to him, I nodded toward Abram, who stood respectfully at the door. He swallowed hard. I suppose I owe you both an apology. You don't owe us anything, Abram said before I could speak. You did what you thought was right at the time. My father shook his head weakly. No, I did what pride told me to. I thought protecting my family meant controlling them. I thought purity was more valuable than happiness. He coughed, his voice cracking. I see now that I was wrong. I sat by his bed and took his hand rough, familiar, trembling. You can't undo the past, Daddy, I said softly. But you can leave it behind. He looked at me, tears gathering in his faded blue eyes. Do you forgive me, Clara? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because forgiveness had never been something I was taught. Then I thought of Abram, of the quiet grace he'd shown me since the night of our truth. And I realized that forgiveness wasn't a gift from my father. It was a gift for myself. I forgive you, I said. And for the first time in 20 years, I meant it. He smiled faintly. Good girl, he whispered. I always knew you'd make something of yourself. No, I said gently. You just never gave me the chance to prove it. He died 3 days later. Peacefully, Mama said. I like to believe it was because he'd finally let go. After the funeral, Abram and I walked. The field behind the house, the same place where I'd once Watched my brothers play while I was told to stay inside. Funny, I said, running my hand through the tall grass. All those years I thought this land was my prison. Now it just looks small. Abram smiled. That's because you outgrew it. I looked at him, then the man who had once been my buyer, my secret, my unexpected salvation, and I saw something I hadn't before, my equal. We should go home, I said, and for the first time, the word home meant his farm, not this one. Years passed. The seasons turned, the farm thrived, and our quiet companionship grew into something richer than either of us had imagined. We adopted children, 3 of them, each one filling our home with laughter and life. I taught them that love wasn't about possession, but about choice. Abram taught them that strength isn't measured in muscle, but in mercy. Whenever I'd hear townsfolk whisper about our strange marriage, I'd smile. They didn't understand that what we had wasn't strange, it was sacred. On our 20th anniversary, we stood together on that same porch, watching the sun set behind the hills. Do you regret anything? I asked him. Only that I didn't find you sooner, he said. I laughed softly. If you had, I'd have been too young and too frightened to see you for who you were. He squeezed my hand. Then I reckon everything happened just as it should. Abram passed peacefully many years later, his hand still holding mine. His last words were simple. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. And I, through tears, whispered back, thank you for teaching me what freedom really means. Now, at 78, I sit on that same porch with our grandchildren playing in the yard. The wind hums through the fields, and the old house still stands strong, just like us. I sometimes think about that frightened girl from Maple Hollow, the one who believed she was being sold into misery. If only she knew she was walking toward her freedom. Because sometimes the life you never wanted becomes the life that saves you. And love, true love, doesn't rescue you from the cage. It hands you the key and teaches you how to use it.